Everybody thinks you need 4 and 5 volt preouts. You don't. The only thing a higher volt radio for the RCAs can give you, the only thing more it can give you in a system is more clipping.
Hey Scruff Dog, thank you so much for making content for bassheads and educating folks on what clipping is and how to avoid it. I want to make a follow-up video on why I think your video is only really showing half of the picture here, and why voltage coming out from your signal source, such as your radio or your DSP, actually really matters, and why you want to match it and have the highest voltage coming out from your radio as possible and your gain settings as low as you can on your amplifier. Before I go into the explanation, I want to show you the test setup here, which will demonstrate why this is, and then I'll talk about the reasons why. So first of all, this is my electric car. I have 400 volts DC in going to my high voltage amplifiers. They're at 400 volts DC, and I'm pushing a 14 volt signal into them, into their preamp section, and I keep that gain as low as possible. That 14 volts is actually 30 volts peak to peak almost. So for the setup, I have a Quant Asylum QA403 audio analyzer. This allows me to analyze the THD and the SNR of the signal. I have that audio analyzer pushing a signal into my line driver and then measuring the output of it. The idea here is we're going to mimic what happens inside of the amplifier when it sees a small signal that it has to amplify versus a large signal that it has to amplify. So let's begin. My audio generator is set to 30 Hertz and negative 32 dBV. Now, what you're going to see is that my THD is horrendous and my SNR is horrendous as well. Basically, signal to noise ratio is, this is the audio data I care about, 30 Hertz, and this is everything else I don't want. Right, so this is all noise that will get amplified and played through my speakers or subwoofers that I do not want. Now, what happens if in real time I increase that voltage and I mimic a radio source, right? Let's say it's a radio or a DSP pushing out a much higher RCA signal level that the preamp section has to amplify, right? All of a sudden, we see that THD has fallen by more than an order of magnitude and SNR has more than doubled. The signal quality that I care about, or the signal, right, at 30 Hertz, is much cleaner, and there's a bigger difference between it and the rest of the noise that's being picked up on the RCA. So this shows me that if I had a signal coming from a radio at negative 3 dBV, in your case, let's say 6 volts from your radio or 4 volts versus 0.2 volts, the difference between the signal that I care about and the noise being picked up by the RCA, the difference is bigger, which means I will have cleaner sound overall. Let me explain why. RCAs in car audio, unlike professional audio and home audio, do not use the balanced cable, right? So RCA has an outer ground jacket and an inner conductor, which has the alternating AC signal, positive and negative, for the sound source. Now what happens is most devices are grounded, right? Which means your amplifier and your radio all share common ground throughout your car chassis. So that is always pretty neutral. Now, as you run your RCA cable from your head unit, and you snake it through your car, it's going to get a lot of electromagnetic radiation from sources such as your lithium bank or your balancer or your car computers, right? There's a lot of CAN activity and so on, and all of that emits a lot of radiation. And along the way, all of that will be picked up. That internal conductor is really the only one being impacted by all of that. So when you have a small signal, like 0.2 volts, 1 millivolt, 2 millivolt, 3 millivolts of radiation will actually have a bigger impact on it as a percentage of the signal versus if you had, let's say, 4 volts coming out. And this is demonstrated here by the signal to noise ratio and the impact that has on THD and quality. So ultimately what we can learn here is that you want the highest voltage coming out of your signal source and the least amount of gain on your amplifier to avoid clipping. This allows the op amps in your preamp section to do less work, less amplification of the dirty noise signal. It will only slightly amplify that full 4 volts coming in to whatever it needs to for the actual driver section, and it will not be amplifying all that noise that the RCA carries along with it. Once again, thank you for making a great video for the basshead community, but I just wanted to call out that you are focusing on just half of the problem, and it's really important to understand the context. That if you can have a higher voltage signal from your radio or DSP going into your amplifier, and you don't have to have the gain as high, that will actually give you a much better SNR and overall better THD. So if you care about sound quality, you do want that higher voltage if you can. I understand not all radios can do that. Some of them are, 1 volt, as you mentioned. But again, just keep this in mind. That was half the equation. This is the other half.